Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on end-to-end supply chain visibility, a look at essential tools for survival in times of disruption. Now, this is the first of a series of two special presentations this summer from Gartner and Supply Chain Brain on surviving in the age of permanent supply chain disruption. I want to take a moment, though, to thank our sponsors for today's presentation, Fortna, Coupa, Texas, and One Network. One quick housekeeping note before we get started. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, time permitting. At this point, I want to present our fantastic speakers for today. Bart de Muynck, he leads Gartner's transportation technology research. As a 30-year supply chain veteran, and with 25 years of experience in logistics, he's seen logistics change from a completely manual function to today's environment, where we continue to see accelerated adoption of digital models and technologies in transportation. Carly West talks about visibility in the supply chain every day. She helps Gartner's clients solve transportation visibility problems. She has even led a project to implement RTTVP, that's real-time transportation visibility platforms, at a previous organization before joining Gartner. She'll be the lead author of the RTTVP MQ, or Magic Quadrant, for 2022. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Bart de Muynck. Bart, take it away.
Well, thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone to this session on visibility. The disruptions of the last 18 months have accelerated the digitalization of supply chains across the world. And visibility has been at the top of the investments that supply chain leaders in pretty much every industry have gotten to. So let's dive right into the topic at hand. Let me start by showing you the roadmap on how to get to visibility. Is that visible to you? No. How about now? Still not very good, right? Well, let's go to the other extreme and light up all the roads across Europe like a Christmas tree. This scenario, however, is not so popular nowadays, especially with everyone focused on sustainability. But you get the point. Well, supply chain visibility is like the light that shows your supply chain roadmap. And supply chain visibility platforms are like the retina that interprets all of the inputs absorbed through its lens, just like through our eyes. And the purpose of the retina is really to receive light that the lens has focused, convert that light into neuro signals, and then sends these signals to our brain for visual recognition. And similarly, visibility takes all of the data from the supply chain and converts it into insights that supply chain leaders can act on. Now, before we get into the physiology of visibility, let's talk about why visibility has become so crucial in these past few years. What we've seen throughout the pandemic is that we've seen an acceleration of supply chain maturity of companies. Before the pandemic, we saw about 19% of supply chains being at a level 4 or 5 of maturity. After the pandemic, that number has gone up to about 34%. It's the biggest increase in 12 months we've ever seen. And it's really been these disruptions that has forced companies to mature very quickly. The other part is that it's not just around being disrupted. We've actually seen that every disruption, according to a Gartner study, increases the cost to serve by about 4%. And it hasn't just been a single disruption. We actually see disruptions coming at us at a much faster pace, and one followed by the other very quickly. And what we're seeing is as these companies go through these different levels of maturity, they evolve from just looking maybe inside of their own functions to really starting to look more across all supply chain functions, even starting to look outside of their own organization. And in order to accomplish that, they need to have end-to-end visibility. And then we're seeing companies at the highest levels of maturity really starting to not just converge the different processes, but also to start working much closer together with their ecosystem of partners, where we start to see networks taking a much more important role into what Gartner calls multi-enterprise networks. And there again, we're starting to see the business process focus again widening. And why are companies doing that? Well, some of the challenges they're actually having to achieve their supply chain goals, as you can see here, are a lack of visibility, but also a lack of the ability to orchestrate end-to-end supply chain processes. And that's why companies are looking at these solutions to tie all the different pieces of the supply chains together to be able to achieve the supply chain goals. Now, this is an example of the high-tech industry. Again, very recent study we did at Gartner, and where it showed that as one of the major strategies that they deployed to achieve greater resilience and agility was actually through the use of supply chain visibility. And again, we see that across many different industries. And so when it comes to visibility, we are seeing that companies who really haven't used visibility and don't have that same resilience and agility are getting hit by disruptions much harder. That's represented here on the slide, where you see when the disruption occurs, we see companies, their readiness gets depleted much faster and much more than companies who have the ability to very quickly respond to disruptions and who very much quicker go back to previous states and become a lot more successful. And so that is really why visibility is no longer a nice to have, but has to be a capability that companies need to equip themselves with if they want to reach that resilience and agility to continue to be at the top of their supply chain, but also to be the most prepared when the new disruption comes around. And again, we have seen disruptions coming at us at a much more frequent and higher pace. So before we go further into the details, how do we really define visibility? What are the core elements of visibility? Now, the first part is obviously it's made up of data, but not just any data. It has to be transparent, accurate, timely, and complete data. And the other part is it can't just be data from inside of your organization. It needs to come from multiple organizations, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that it also comes from services. And lastly, you want to turn that data into insight that then you can use to help plan and execute in your supply chain operations.
I want to take a moment to talk about a couple of our sponsors for this presentation today. Coupa empowers companies around the world with the visibility and control they need to spend smarter and safer. By unifying procurement, supply chain, payment, and treasury processes, Coupa helps maximize the value of every dollar a business spends. Coupa's supply chain design and planning enables smarter, faster, AI-powered decision-making, enabling organizations to adapt to changing business needs and accelerate supply chain digitization. For more information, visit www.coupa.com. Fortna, our second sponsor of today. Disruption isn't a black swan event. Supply chain leaders must rapidly evaluate risk and be prepared to pivot to address changing marketing conditions. Visibility and adaptability are key requirements for a resilient supply chain. Fortna can help. Fortna helps companies transform distribution by leveraging intelligent technologies and software to increase visibility. Leverage the Fortna data-driven approach to improve your ability to make decisions, adjust operations, and ensure resilience for your business. Learn more at Fortna.com. With that, I'll pass it back to Carly West. Carly?
Thanks, Bob. As Bart mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the different segmentations in the visibility market. So in order to achieve end-to-end supply chain visibility, it is a requirement to connect multiple visibility touch points across your supply chain from a variety of participants within your network. This could mean drilling down into specific transportation visibility, planning, ordering, purchasing, it's all a piece that has to be connected in order to achieve that end-to-end supply chain visibility. But what's preventing organizations from internally from achieving these supply chain objectives? This just expands a little bit upon what Bart mentioned before, and you can see that some of the top 5 challenges that organizations are facing internally is that lack of visibility across their supply chain, and also the cross-functional collaboration challenges internally. But what does that mean externally as well? The complexity of those supply chain networks, working together and collaborating with customers and suppliers, those are some of the top obstacles that organizations have defined in their external challenges to achieving these supply chain objectives. In order to truly build end-to-end supply chain visibility, it is incumbent that you build the data and connect the data across multiple partners and networks within your supply chain network. By connecting the data and building that layer, you can then start to make better decisions, improve your processes, and ultimately automate some of your decision-making in order to tackle some of those challenges that we just talked about. In order to build this end-to-end visibility, there's a few approaches you can take. You can build an internal supply chain control tower, or you can buy or subscribe to an existing platform. These are some of the vendors that we see out in the market that you can actually purchase a control tower solution from. And then there's also vendors that you could leverage to help you to build your control tower solution. Within the visibility market, as I mentioned before, it's quite segmented and quite fragmented. We see end-to-end visibility solutions, like Bart mentioned before, with the multi-enterprise business networks, the supply chain control tower solutions, which again, feed a bunch of different data sources being fed into one housed solution. But then when you talk about specifically drilling into transportation visibility for that piece of the supply chain, there's even segmentation here. We see a variety of solutions out on the marketplace, tracking and monitoring tools or the IoT devices that you might put in your products, international multimodal logistics platforms, where they might help you with some of the execution in your global trade or international transportation activities. Also, some TMS providers actually extend and provide visibility as a part of their solution. But what we're going to talk a little bit more about today is the real-time transportation visibility platform market. This is a market that we actually see as a leader in the transportation visibility space. We're seeing the most momentum in this segment, and we're seeing a shift from this segment from the traditional domestic road capabilities to a more global and more intermodal solution, because a lot of organizations are looking for that larger global solution for their transportation visibility. When you think about that visibility and that real-time visibility platform solution, originally where a lot of the focus in this market and the interest was around providing that customer visibility and that better experience for your customer or your outbound transportation activity. But we've actually seen a pretty quick shift to bring that more upstream as well and get visibility to your inbound inventory, your inbound supplies, your inbound raw goods or materials to then export to your customers. Especially with the impacts that we've seen of the supply chain disruption recently, more and more companies are looking to get better insights onto that inbound activity. And in order to do that, the real-time transportation visibility platforms have to connect the multiple legs of a shipment. You have to be able to connect that ocean or air piece that's coming into the country, and then that domestic piece that then brings it into your facility or your customer or your DC. It's important to be able to string all of that together to get a true picture on what is going on with your shipment, where it is, and what the ETA might be. To drill that down just a little bit further, it's important to connect each leg of the shipment and the status that's occurring at each action within the shipment. So what I mean by that, you can see here some examples on different stops a shipment might take from all the way from origin to the final destination. These are some examples of a dray to a port, to a ship, to another port, to a truck, maybe even to a rail, to then an interchange, and then ultimately to destination. In order to really be precise and accurate on your ETA and the impacts that that's going to have on your supply chain, your inventory, and ultimately costs that could be incurred by your organization, it's important that a real-time visibility platform is able to really drill in and be specific and precise across each of these activities. So what vendors are in this market? As you can see here, these are some of the key vendors that we come across a lot in our research here at Gartner. Some of these vendors, interestingly enough, offer capabilities that do cross over multiple of the segments. Maybe they offer a TMS that also offers a standalone visibility, or vice versa with the international multimodal platforms. But what we're actually seeing as sort of a trend in this market today is a partnership across these platforms and providers with each other. Ultimately, the goal is you see these partnerships between your international visibility providers, the real-time visibility providers, and even into the IoT and sensor providers, allowing their customers a more seamless experience, allowing their customers to view all of their transportation activity on one platform, even if they might be using different solutions to achieve that. And I'll give it back to Bob.
Visibility is vital. In addition to seeing what's wrong, you need intelligent options with the ability to execute them. One Network's NEO platform connects you and your trading partners to a digital supply chain network for a real-time single version of the truth, allowing you to see, plan, and execute across your supply chain. It's trusted by leading organizations around the globe, including Albertsons, Cummins, PepsiCo, and the U.S. Department of Defense. Learn more at www.onenetwork.com. Texas is a global provider of supply chain solutions that equip the borderless enterprise for growth. Spanning healthcare, retail, and distribution industries, Texas delivers dynamic and powerful solutions for warehouse management, distribution and transportation management, point-of-use supply, retail order, financial management, and analytics. If you need to clarify uncertainty in your supply chain, move forward confidently with Texas and gain the end-to-end visibility you need to achieve greatness. Learn more at texas.com. Back to you, Bart.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bob. So now that we had the overview from Carly around the segmentation of visibility, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of different use cases, both from the end user, but then also we see a very segmented market from a vendor perspective. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive in kind of the features of these solutions. And it's very important to understand the physiology of visibility, to understand what are the components that make up these solutions. And again, as Carly said, transportation is an area where we see a lot of activity. Transportation has become so incredibly important. And so what you're seeing in these transportation visibility solutions, that on the one side, you obviously have to be able to integrate to the shipper's systems, whether that's an ERP or TMS, or maybe in some cases, you have partnerships with other visibility vendors that provide you some of that transportation insight. So the shipper network is a core component of what these visibility platforms offer. On the other side, obviously, you need to get connected to the carriers, because the carriers are the ones that are going to provide you with that data. And again, there's a lot of different ways to connect to carriers, whether it's through telematics or ELD, it's through mobile apps, it's through APIs or other systems. So again, the carrier network is the other part that makes that platform connected both on the shipper and the carrier side. And then the foundation of the solution is really around how that platform is able to pull in all the data, collect it all together, clean the data, harmonize it, stitch it all together, then apply analytics on top of it. So that really is the foundation of these platforms. The application layer then sits on top of that. It sits on top of the foundational analytics and data layer, connected to the network layer to then provide applications. And we're seeing companies continue to extend the capabilities they can offer within visibility, things like real-time tracking, updates of estimated time of arrivals or ETA, and continuously do that across more and more modes as we're seeing the end user asking not just for one particular region or one particular mode of transportation, but most companies nowadays are looking for that kind of one single pane of glass or one single view of visibility. And then on top of that, the pure visibility players are starting to expand those capabilities also into other application capabilities, such as appointment scheduling or yard management or document management. And then we're seeing companies that are in end-to-end visibility that often already have those applications, especially in the multi-enterprise networks, where they can tie that together with TMS systems or global trade management solutions or procurement systems. If you look at the core differentiators between the different solutions and the factors that should influence you when you go to market and look for one of these solutions, don't just look at it the traditional way of looking at an application like a TMS or a WMS, where you kind of look at the core functional capabilities. What's important here are things like modal coverage. Does that vendor actually apply and provide all of the different modes of transportation that I use in my company? If I am a company that's maybe not just within a single country, but within a region or even globally, does that vendor have global coverage? And again, in the world of visibility, which is built on carrier networks, a lot of the times we don't speak about regions in the sense of North America and Europe, but you're talking about in North America, the US and Canada and Mexico, which have quite diverse carrier networks. Or in Europe, where you have regions that we can build into DAX region, which is Germany, Switzerland, and those regions, as well as Benelux or the UK, or then the Southern Mediterranean countries like Spain and Italy. Then you go and look at the carrier network. What is the carrier network, and how does that carrier network really run parallel with the carriers that you're using? Whether you're just using full truckload carriers, whether you're using maybe reefer carriers, LTL carriers, in some cases, maybe using heavier kind of carriers that do flatbed trucks. Does that vendor offer that network that's in line with the carriers that you're already using? And then, as we said, data quality, and we'll talk a little bit more about data quality, is really a very important aspect, because a lot of vendors collect data, but data isn't always the same. So you have to understand as well the quality of the data that the vendor provides. And then compliance. Compliance is another important part. Is not just, can I connect to the carrier, but is the carrier also compliant? Are they actually through the platform providing the data I need? Are they doing that into a consistent way? Are they providing you all the data elements that you need? And then obviously there's a lot of partnerships, not just with ERPs, but also specific to transportation with TMSs. And that's very important because in many cases, the shipment created in the TMS is what kind of creates the link to the carrier update. And vice versa, you also want to be able to bring the data from the visibility platform back into your TMS, which then allows you to create a workflow around the specific use case that you're trying to build. And as we're seeing these systems evolve, we're seeing that companies in times of disruptions are counting more and more on these systems to provide them with things like predictive analytics, real-time events, but also risk monitoring. These are all main ways to monitor disruptions. And those three that are highlighted here are all specific areas that visibility solutions address. As some of the trends we're seeing in this transportation visibility area is that it really started several years ago with the biggest kind of demand in North America. But meantime, we're also seeing that Europe is growing very, very fast. And not just with North American multinational companies, but also with European companies adopting more and more these solutions. As I said before, the multiple modes, they're expanding. We used to see contracts specifically for one mode of transportation. Now, many of the RFIs and RFPs include multiple modes of transportation. And so the end user are changing their requirements, but then also the vendors have to make sure that they can offer all of those different modes of transportation, which leads to continuous consolidation and acquisition in the market. And in some cases, some of the vendor actually organically expanding their coverage and their capabilities. We're also seeing more partnerships. We're seeing more partnerships with the SCM vendors, where more and more of these vendors partner with the SAPs of the world, or the Oracles of the world, or even the Blue Yonders and the Manhattan Associates. But we're also seeing more partnering with telematics providers, even in some cases with other vendors, technology vendors out there, or with other visibility vendors, whether that's between international focused vendors and more domestic focused vendors, or the partnerships between the IoT or sensor based vendors and the real-time visibility vendors as well. And then we're seeing companies, as they grow their capabilities, not just focused on purely looking at the data, bringing the data in and providing insights to the data, but then also saying, how do we now take that into a workflow and creating applications around it? So we're seeing more companies focusing on things like document management, or things like booking of ocean trips, or potentially even automating certain workflows. And we will continue to see acquisitions in the market as end users are looking more, as I mentioned before, for that single pane of glass or that single view of visibility. At this point, we could say that there is no single company that has, for all modes of transportation, has the whole world connected. Transportation is just too segmented. So we're seeing that a lot of companies partner, but also that they continue to expand their capabilities. So from that perspective, we're seeing, even in the vendor landscape where these solutions are still fairly young, we're seeing an increase in maturity. We're also seeing that increase in maturity on the end user side. A new customer that comes new to visibility typically starts with fairly simple visibility. Just like the picture I showed in the beginning, maybe they go from having complete darkness to that little candle, to at least have a start of visibility as you're connecting to all your carriers. You're mainly doing that for your biggest mode of transportation, which for a lot of companies is road transportation, full truckload mainly, and then starting to collect all of the data. Now, once you have collected the data, now you can start doing a lot more with the data. I always kind of jokingly say that when these vendors use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, it actually implies that you need to collect the data and start to learn from the data to give you the insights. Otherwise, we just would call it machine doing. And that's kind of that second phase where we go from pure analytics to decision support phase, is where we can get a lot more advanced insights coming from that data and coming from the advanced analytics. At the same time, those companies continue to expand their rollout, whether maybe within domestic transportation, they move from just outbound to also include inbound transportation. They might add ocean visibility as well. And they might go from North America, maybe include other regions like Europe and Asia Pacific, or in some cases, even Africa and South America. And then really the goal where a lot of companies, their strategy goes towards, is hopefully in a few years to be able to then start doing more prescriptive insights that help you to automate some of your workflow, to maybe in certain cases to augment your employees with insights that help drive automation of very simple use cases, or at least give you a lot more tools that makes it very much quicker to react to a certain disruption, and definitely to give you kind of that data at the palm of your hands to make immediate actions. And what we're seeing is, as you grow in that maturity and you're using more and more extensive use of these visibility solutions, that's where we're seeing the increase of the value to these companies. So again, you might start with a lower ROI, but then as you increase across maturity, you quickly extend that benefit. But again, every start is difficult. And where we're seeing the biggest kind of challenge that companies had as they started, and companies that started 4 years ago definitely had a lot more issues around that, is around the data. It's around the data quality. It's around the data compliance, making sure that you get all of your carriers connected, that all of those carriers are providing you consistently and timely and good data. And that hopefully at some point in time, you can get all of your carriers connected to the network. So that is something that the vendors are continuously working on, and we see most of the vendors having organizations in their departments that also work with carriers on improving the data that they're getting from the carriers, which in turn will provide better insights to you as an end user of that data. So with that, now that we've looked at kind of what visibility really means, the different segments in the visibility market, as well as the physiology of the visibility solutions, I'll now hand it over to Carly, who will talk a little bit about the benefits of these solutions.
Thanks, Bart. Yes, so what I would like to talk to you about is the multiple ways that you can realize not just benefits, but actual ROI as well back to your business. What I mean by that is the actual dollar amount you can justify and bring back into your business from the use of a real-time transportation visibility platform. As you can see here, we've identified numerous categories where we typically see organizations realizing ROI through the use of these platforms. We collected over 250 use cases across a variety of organizations, across a variety of industries to come up with this list. What you can see in the light blue is actual ranges that you might expect to receive of a savings back to your business based on the expense that you usually carry in these different categories. Some you can see have kind of a vast range of a lower and an upper limit. That's really because as an organization, you know where you've spent the most time already working on an objective to reduce costs or expenses, or maybe an area of opportunity that's really big and opportunistic for your organization, where you might receive benefits on the higher side. As you can see here, a lot of these benefits actually do tie back to a type of labor expense in your organization. And what that means here are some examples are customer service labor. So customers calling in, emailing in, asking, what is my ETA, where is my product? And the team that has to take the time to answer those questions. On the flip side of that, the transportation or logistics team who might be contacting the carriers to try to get that information. Then there's also impacts to your own warehouse or DC labor, whether they might be trying to track down similar information like that, they might be waiting on delayed trucks, or they could be reallocated to better use of their time if they had this information at their fingertips. And then you can see here, there's a lot of other true dollar amount benefits, like things related to on-time penalties you might be paying. On-time delivery performance is typically improved significantly through the use of these platforms, and just kind of like that spotlight on the data and what's happening. Container dwell, driver detention, potentially your inventory carrying costs. You're able to actually take actions within your organization to reduce some of these. But it isn't just limited to dollar amounts back to your business, though that is very important. There's also a lot of other benefits that can be driven back across your entire ecosystem. So what's really great about these platforms is they're truly a collaborative platform where all of the parties within your network get to work together. So think of it from a shipper 3PL perspective who's actually purchasing the platform and sharing this data and information with your customers to provide better customer experience. But then also your carriers and your suppliers, collaborating with them to improve their operations, streamline communications, drive more value back to the business. You can also impact things like sustainability objectives, your communication costs, again, reducing your dwell and detention, maybe even driving capacity back into the market by optimizing empty miles, keeping drivers on the road more. Just there's limitless possibilities on the ways that multiple organizations can collaborate together using these platforms to realize benefits. And again, the key is that it's benefits shared across your ecosystem. One thing we always recommend to customers who are going out to explore this real-time visibility implementation is to share this information with their partners in your ecosystem. Really position yourself as a partner of choice. Help your carriers, help your suppliers understand the importance and the value that's back to them, what's in it for them to help connect to this platform, to really help improve your implementation and speed it up. Again, not just your network can collaborate together though, you can actually collaborate across a variety of networks. So you can see here a depiction of 1, 2, and 3 networks that can work together within the platform. These networks can collaborate together to reduce things like empty miles. Again, drive capacity back into the market if you're seeing opportunities where one company might be sending drivers empty, another company's sending drivers full, and they could marry those together to reduce some of those empty miles, improving sustainability. Again, working together to help reduce detention costs and improve asset utilization, and ultimately improving that inventory visibility across the multiple networks. So what do we recommend for you? Our recommendations are simply that you do use visibility to create efficiencies, both during time of disruption, but also when you're just regular operations, whenever that might be, right? Provide real-time transportation visibility to both your internal and your external partners by identifying the best platform to connect with your carriers. Create your roadmap, both for your short-term and your long-term objectives across that maturity journey that Bart talked you through to help identify the timeline of your visibility project. And then partner with the vendors that best meet your company's objectives, your regional coverage, your modal coverage, and how they align with your company's visions and your carrier networks. What we really want you to take away from this conversation today is that visibility is truly about building a foundation, providing data-driven insights as a basis for making smart decisions. At the core of all of this automation and decision-making and process improvement is that data and that visibility. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Carly, and thank you, Bart. It's time for the question and answer portion of our presentation. We do have a number of good audience questions, and even as we are answering them, we do have time for the audience to continue to submit questions by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Just real quickly, one of our audience members asked, what is a dray? A dray is simply short haul transportation, usually by truck, say between a port and a local warehouse. That's what the word means, dray or drayage. And so questions for our panelists, our speakers today. How do we define supply chain maturity?
Yeah, very good. So Gartner has a model for supply chain maturity where we identify 5 different stages. And it's really looking at the strategy of a company across different functions, how they use processes, people, and technology. So based on that, and we actually do a lot of work with our customers to help them identify that through toolkits where they can do a self-assessment, where they can then, based on their answers, we come up with scores for those individual areas that then leads to an overall supply chain maturity score. We actually, in the logistics space, go even deeper, and we actually have a special model that looks at specific logistics maturity as well. So that's how we come up with that. Obviously, that alone would probably take up half of a day, if not longer, to discuss all of that, but all of that material is available on Gartner.com. And obviously, if people have further questions, we can always get some more information on that as well.
Thank you. How important is it for CPGs or consumer packaged goods companies to get visibility to shop floor data?
Yeah, so shop floor data is obviously very important, right? Because I think it's a little bit different from kind of what we talked about, the second part, the transportation visibility, but shop floor data is obviously incredibly important if you look at it from a manufacturing perspective as well. So what we're seeing, and even with transportation, where initially you would think that only the transportation organization would be interested in the data, is that we've actually, in a lot of cases, see manufacturing using the data, where it's the product coming in, whether it's raw materials or intermediate goods, but also when the product is going out, especially with what we're seeing is a lot more short lead time of orders and products literally being manufactured and going right back out the door. So having the ability to not just have visibility in the intermediary stages of transportation, but then actually having it within the shop floor and all those, even in the warehouse, that obviously is a core part of what we call more that end-to-end supply chain visibility, where you're taking away all of kind of the black holes in between all of the functions, and not just have it outside of the 4 walls, but then also understand what's going on with that product or with that inventory, or even with those materials within the 4 walls.
You described so many parts of the supply chain that are subject to possible visibility. This question is, what part of visibility should I focus on first?
So I think when you talk about what part of visibility should I focus on first, it's important to identify your objectives, right? So what are you trying to accomplish? Where do you maybe see the biggest opportunity or maybe the biggest gaps for your visibility within your organization? We do see a lot of organizations start with this transportation related visibility, and that's probably just because it is one of the areas where there's the most opportunity, the most risk, and honestly, the lack of visibility prior to the investment in these real-time visibility platforms. So again, each organization's different. You really have to define what are your objectives and where are your opportunities. But we do see a lot of organizations start with transportation as a crux for building that building blocks of data.
All right, thank you. When you discuss complete visibility TMS or transportation management solutions, how often are those updates provided? And how are they fed into an ERP system? Question goes on. Once a shipment goes on the water, for instance, how often are we seeing updates saying a vessel's expected undock date?
Yeah, it's a little bit different on a mode by mode, right? So if you're looking, for example, a last mile, which are very short time periods in execution, we want to get a lot more updates. That's why we again, on the domestic side, we refer to it as real-time transportation visibility, because there you want to get it maybe every 10 to 15 minutes, because in a 10 to 15 minute period, something can happen that could completely throw off an ETA. Versus a container that's on the ocean, typically with sailing schedules, unless something completely, unexpected would happen, like a fire or something happening with the ship, you wouldn't necessarily need to ping that ship every 10 minutes to understand what the movement of that vessel is. But then with the international and the multimodal, what we see, what's more important, what Carly kind of addressed, was like all of those intermediary points. So we see a lot more, for example, with ocean, that it's not kind of the vessel's sailing time where we see most of the disruption, but maybe when it comes to port, or the fact that during disruption, they couldn't come into the port and get offloaded, or maybe they come and the ship arrives at the terminal, but now we don't have enough employees to offload the containers. Or now that we've offloaded those containers, maybe they're stuck because maybe they're on customs hold. So depending on the mode, we're seeing different speeds of updates per mode of transportation, but then also the importance of all of those intermediary points as well, and get updates even when the product is sitting somewhere, but it's not necessarily moving.
Are you seeing a high level of participation from shippers and carriers in these aggregated view management tools? Are there some vendors who will simply not play? What is their incentive to play?
Yeah, I think, especially when you think of transportation visibility in particular, obviously it's reliant on the carrier's participation and feed of the data into the platform, right? And there is no secret that some carriers, some drivers in particular, may not want to share their data, or might have some struggles with the compliance to that. And so that is one of the struggles within this market, just transparent with that. But then one of the ways that you can work to combat that, again, is going back to some of that benefits that I mentioned before, on really helping your carriers understand why you're doing this, what's the objective, what's the outcome, but most importantly, what's in it for them. So we see some differentiation between vendors on things that they can offer in their solution to carriers. So are there benefits back to carriers? Are there tools or pieces of the application that provide certain value to carriers on top of just that general benefits that they can realize?
And maybe to add on to that, right? So the fact of aggregated data also plays with the fact that these are platforms, right? So they're made out of, as I explained, the carrier networks and the shipper networks. So it allows these companies to aggregate the data across multiple carriers and multiple shippers. So you'll see that most of the vendors will actually use the data in an anomalized way, so that you can see that data across an aggregated profile. So for example, what is my on-time delivery at a location, or what is the detention time at a Walmart location? But now you can see it for all the deliveries that were made at that particular Walmart location, where pretty much every food and beverage company goes and delivers. So there's a lot of value, at least to get from these cloud-based platforms, to get that insight instead of just in your own four walls, what you collect as data, to get that across all of the companies. And we now see the first leaders in this area that have hundreds of customers all sharing data. And then the second part is where on top of that, as Carly explained with the collaboration, where shippers are actively working together to go a lot deeper and open up the individual, the non-anomalized data, but the actual kind of shipment by shipment data to look at the networks and see if there are areas where they can collaborate. And obviously from that perspective, then can get to then that next level of network benefits.
Here's a question that ties supply chain visibility to risk management. How do these platforms help teams simulate the impact of disruptions within the supply chain network? What are the types of scenarios that retailers can simulate?
Yeah, so if you look at the solution, really what they're doing is they're getting the data and they can predict data. They don't typically do simulation, right? Now, there are obviously the end-to-end visibility providers that also have applications. Some of the vendors that we talked about during the presentation might have things like TMS systems that have modeling tools in them, or network design tools, or have specific tools around that. So that would be more of an application you would need to have, like a network modeling tool or an optimization tool. I think some of the sponsors that were participating in this session have some of those capabilities, where the visibility solution really has the data, but then it could connect that data to the applications that can, based on that data, run certain scenarios. But I would say we have to kind of separate what is visibility versus then what is that modeling tool. But obviously the big part of a modeling tool, it's not just the capability of the tool, it's where do you get the data? And that's where these visibility platforms come in to be able to provide it the data.
Well, we're getting some really good questions here today. With this level of visibility, does the demand hub get visibility to orders in transit with the ability to make allocation adjustments in real time?
Yeah, so you can extend the access to the data from the real-time visibility platforms to any internal parties or even external parties that you wish. You're typically able to kind of define roles and restrictions on what users can access and what they can't. What a lot of organizations will do is actually set up alerts. So you get just a proactive notification when there's a delay or an impact to your shipment that might cause it to be late. And then ultimately the goal is that, yes, you're able to use these platforms in such a way that over time you have reliance in the data, you trust the data, you're getting really accurate ETAs that you can then take it up to your demand center and maybe make some different choices around your inventory, where you carry it, where you order more, where you maybe reduce some safety stock and things like that. So absolutely, that's an outcome that could be used, these platforms can be used for.
But I will say, Bob, in reality, right, so far we've seen companies adjust inventory at a very small level. So although we get a lot more of this in-transit information, it gives us the insight of what could we allocate, or how could we potentially reduce safety stocks? In reality, people still don't have that comfort level to do that kind of in a big way. So we see some companies kind of starting to do that. Most companies, I came from a large CPG organization, they still use a passive available to promise. So kind of we have information of what's in transit, but we don't allocate it in transit. We're just expecting the inventory to be there. And I think that is less of a technology decision. That's more, how do we organize ourselves differently? How do we change our processes? So we shouldn't kind of forget that in many cases, some of these questions aren't just pure technology based. It's also, how are you organized? And I will say, we also talked about the data to help you automate certain processes. The reality is also that most companies aren't organized to automate a lot of their processes. So that will take time. And it's good to see that when I started in logistics technology 25 years ago, technology was way behind where we were with processes. I would say now technology is ahead of it. And so a lot of the work we also need to do is changing the process and the organization.
It's never just about technology, is it?
Correct. Technology is just an enabler.
Sure. Yeah. This audience questioner says, I work for an IoT sensor solution provider. focused on being a data source for visibility in supply chain. Our assumption is that people in general will be welcome to increased visibility, and certainly the supply chain user realizes numerous benefits. My question is, if you are hearing any concerns or feedback from the end receivers or customers who receive shipments with IoT sensors attached. I'm curious if there are receivers who feel like privacy is invaded or are uncertain about increased visibility.
That's not a concern that I've personally experienced. Any customers share that they feel their privacy has been invaded by a sensor being in the shipment when it is received. Typically, you would see sensors used in specific categories or specific types of products where it's almost expected that that would occur. Like think about, temperature sensitive, environmentally sensitive, high value, pharmaceuticals, things like that. And it's typically expected in those scenarios that you would have a device in the product to track it.
Yeah, and the other part as well is obviously in Europe, even more than North America, right? Privacy, GDPR, all of that is a major concern. So I would say the vendors are doing a really good job to make sure that they are aligned with all of the local and regional privacy laws so that there's no kind of issues with that. And I would say the other part of it, a lot of time you have to remember that some of this information is, or some of these devices are used based on the requirements of the customer. The customer wants to know that the product is being tracked. They want to get the updates. They want to get the updates not just on location, but also on condition. So when they get the product, they also understand that that product was, for example, if it's refrigerated, was kept at the right temperature, and how that, for example, impacts the shelf life, just as much as the supplier wants to understand that, hey, that product was below a certain temperature, and so when it arrives, you can't just refuse the load. So it's a lot of these are very collaborative, and a lot of the requirements are both by the person shipping the product, but also a lot of it is asked by the customer. And so as such, I agree with Carly. We haven't heard anyone kind of saying, hey, there was a tracker in my product, I wasn't aware, or I feel it as an invasion in my privacy.
Is it important to have community master data?
The data quality is important across any of these platforms, right? So, it's like the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. If there isn't some quality to the data that's being both fed in and then fed back out of the platforms, then obviously it's not going to be viable. When you talk about master data, typically that makes me at least think of kind of like items and inventory and all of the item information or carrier information, et cetera. And so again, I would still say yes, the data quality is a key to success out of any type of foundational data application.
Okay. Small parcel carriers information is sometimes inaccurate. For example, packages might be returned to a sender, but the data says they were delivered to the customer. How do I collaborate with them, and what's in it for them if they provide me accurate data?
Yeah, parcel is a tricky one, right? Because often parcel is not real time. Why? Because we're not getting real time information from a parcel delivery vehicle. And we don't have sensors yet. That's still to come. We might be in a future where in 5 or 10 years, every single parcel package will have a sensor built into it, but that isn't the case. So in many cases, the information we're getting from the parcel carriers and the couriers are milestone updates. So they're not real time. And we have to kind of depend on that update to see if it's accurate, rather than being able to say, well, can we actually ping that vehicle and understand the vehicle is actually there, or ping the product itself? So yes, short term, we're not going to see that change. We do see that there's many more ways of delivering parcels through crowdsourced services, through private fleets. They obviously have either apps or they have telematics that we can ping when we do get real-time information. But in many cases, with the UPSs and the FedExes, et cetera, a lot of it is still milestone information, which in some cases is not accurate or up to date.
Let's try to squeeze in a couple more here. Do you see the YMS, Yard Management System, TMS, Transportation Management System, and WMS, Warehouse Management System market coming together toward a more integrated RTTVP?
Yes, I will say that I'll answer the question this way, where we saw initially the real-time transportation visibility really more focused on the transportation part, which means, the TMS. We really see that just having the visibility on the road isn't enough, right? So if you look at logistics, the ideal is to have the logistics in the warehouse when the product moves to the dock door, to have it in the yard when it moves from the dock door until the gate, vice versa, also on the inbound side, and then the road. So I think the most value you will get, but again, it's a journey, when you get within logistics, that end-to-end logistics visibility, which will combine the data and the visibility data between yard management, warehouse management, and transportation management.
Okay. Do you think RFID, radio frequency identification, or another emerging technology will play a key role in the visibility journey? And when do you think it will be readily mature and available?
I can take a stab at that one. So I would say RFID, not necessarily on the visibility that we've discussed here, but again, there's many versions of visibility, right? And I was part of an organization that was part of the Walmart mandate many years ago when we had to put RFID tags on pretty much everything. And if you're selling, for example, 99-cent bags of Lay's chips, doesn't make sense to put an RFID on it. But where we're seeing it used a lot is, for example, in stores with clothing items, where you can go in as a customer and understand exactly where, if you don't find your size, it's like, hey, this is exactly what we have in inventory, and this is also where the product is. We're seeing less utilization of these RFID tags. A lot of them are passive tags in the transportation visibility, because again, it's real time. You don't necessarily have readers when you're on the road. So most of it is typically visibility that you get through Wi-Fi or through 4G, LTE, 5G networks, which are either the trackers or coming real time from the telematic solutions or from the app.
Let's see if we can squeeze in one more question. And it actually is a very good one, because it kind of provides us with the opportunity to give our audience a key takeaway. And that is, how do I start my visibility journey?
Yeah, so, the number one step is to define, kind of like I said before, what is your objectives? Define some of those key criteria that Bart mentioned. What modes do I want to connect? What geographies am I operating in? What TMS or ERP partnerships do I need to make sure these real-time visibility partners have? And then start talking to the vendors. Start having some vendor demos, have them show you your capabilities, ultimately kick off an RFP where you're asking what carriers of mine are already connected to your platform, and a variety of other questions to really drill down into the quality and the accuracy of the provider and how well they meet your objectives.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. By the way, we had numerous audience members asking if they would have access to the slides after the presentation. The answer is yes. Okay, so that's all we have time for. I want to thank Carly West and Bart de Muynck, our great speakers for today, with this information-packed presentation. If you want to know more about this and other topics, please visit the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium and Expo from October 25th to the 27th in Orlando. There's the information right there for registering. There's a discount code there that you can see also. And don't forget, we will see you again on August 24th for the second presentation of our summer webinar series on the topic of automation innovation. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to register for that event. And so with that, I'm going to say goodbye on behalf of Gartner and Supply Chain Brain, Carly West, Bart de Muynck. Audience members, thank you so much for listening in, for those great questions. We'll see you again in August. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Bob.